There is a strange second thermal signature that appears after the second zoom on this newly released UAP infrared footage. There is also a linear wake that appears and persists for several seconds. Then it resolves. There's no published explanations that account for this behavior, so let's take a closer look at file DOD UAP PR101 South China Sea 2024 UAP report. Welcome to Hallucination Hippies. So the record presented here is clean on paper. In this file, in 2024, a U.S. military infrared sensor recorded this footage over South China Sea, and it was then submitted to Aero. Beyond that, the file closes because there's no sensor platform data, there's no altitude, there's no distance to target, range info, none of it has been released. Here's what the DoD actually wrote about the footage. It's 1 minute, 46 seconds of video footage from an infrared sensor aboard a U.S. military platform in 2024. Not birds, not a camera artifact, not something extraordinary. It doesn't say any of that. It refers to it as a line of several areas of contrast. Now, take note of this. The official language does not identify. It describes. And that's a deliberate choice in how intelligence documents are usually formatted. And let's start with what's objectively on the record, without interpretation. Around 16 seconds, the initial zoom happens, and then you start to see this single bright thermal point where it enters the frame. It's white hot against a low noise sky, and then at 30 seconds, a distinct linear wake trails the object, and it does continue for a bit. It's fairly persistent, thermally independent of the primary source, and you can see it. Then, around 58 seconds, the object passes through what looks to be this kind of mid-level cloud layer. And that is not a trivial detail because that is altitude geometry, even though we don't have that specific data. Now, before the next clip, here's what you're looking for. The sensor is running auto gain control, AGC, and it's attempting to compensate for the thermal intensity differential between the dark sky and the object or objects. The washout pattern you see is most likely not an artifact, it's a measurement. The object is significantly hotter than its background, and it's hot enough to saturate the sensor's dynamic range. That is another data point. The charitable read on this whole thing, when you look at it, would be a loose formation of birds that are in transit. Slightly warm against a cooler background, that would account for the elongated shape, for the multiple thermal returns. Let's look at some visual data points. Does it accelerate? It does hold relatively constant against the cloud drift. It looks like there is a relatively constant speed. Does it maintain a linear wake? Yes, it does continuously for a few seconds. Does it change direction? It does seem to diverge from its initial trajectory here in a couple spots, very slightly, smoothly, and it doesn't look like it's decelerating at all. It seems relatively consistent. Does the object itself seem to break shape? It does seem to break shape, especially in this one point here. So you can see this one object, which is another point of contrast, that is trailing and following the main formation. And it does so here just for a bit, and then it seems to merge back. So let's run through some hypothesis predictions. And we'll start with birds. So with birds, there's independent movement. There's usually going to be spacing variations, altitude drift, inconsistent with a single kind of cohesive thermal signature. And the wake would be an interesting point of contention there. A balloon cluster. If it were a cluster of balloons, you would have this slow drift, most likely. It would be consistent with wind motion. There wouldn't be any fluid directional change, most likely. These would not hold a shape. A conventional aircraft with an exhaust trail. Consistent with the wake, most likely. Partially consistent with the thermal intensity and the shape of the object. It would be inconsistent with the slight variances that do occur in the break of the shape that we looked at, the fluctuations, and what looks to be, these individual areas of contrast. So, are we looking at something non-human or truly exotic? Now, I will say that it does not seem to definitively cross off many of the observables. There's no instant acceleration shown. There's no transmedium capabilities shown. We don't have the data, so unfortunately we don't know the exact speed, but it doesn't appear to be demonstrating hypervelocity. However, one can argue that we may not truly know what to look for or what to recognize when it comes to something truly not of this world. The forensic gap is very specific. There is no telemetry data that's been released. There's no altitude, no range, no bearings. Those numbers allow calculations that we can't do. And the DOD has that info. They have that file, but we do not. So this case officially remains unresolved and open, but I'd love for you to share your thoughts on this file. Is it prosaic or is it something else?